Executive Director here. Today we have Jenna here from ISU Extension and Outreach to talk about the history of 4-H. Our items today, over there, the blue dress belonged to Melba Dagan Terrell and Glenda Terrell Rhodes. It's probably from the 1930s, 1940s, we're not quite sure.
No, I wore it in the 50s.
So my understanding is that the uniform from basically like 1910 to like the 1960s basically looked the same. So yeah, we're not quite sure where it's from because they do look so similar. And the dates that we were given for them don't really line up with anything in particular. But Melba and Glenda were both members of Peterson Limewires. And then over here we have one of the last 4-H dresses. This was worn by Susan Weedy Schumacher, so it's from the 1970s. So other than that, I'll hand it over to you.
I was going to say, did we ever wear? We never wore those. They had green blazers and skirts after that, or pants.
Say the Peterson Limewires?
Live wires. They are still a club.
Live wires. Live wires, not
Live
live.
wires.
Live wires.
Yes, they are still a club. So like Shelby said, my name is Jenna Keene. I am a native of Northwest Iowa, and I just moved back home a couple years ago. And I am the Youth Outreach Coordinator at the Clay County Extension Office here in town. I'm super excited to be here today. I thought you were coming. Oh, welcome. So I am going to do my best to share the knowledge that I have and the knowledge that I have found recently. But I'm just excited to be here. So just to kind of give you an introduction, like I said, I'm Jenna Keene. I grew up in O'Brien County. I was a 4-H'er my whole 4-H career. And I grew up just outside of Manita in O'Brien County. My family raised hogs, and so we showed pigs. I started showing lambs when I was in high school, mostly because it was something my brothers didn't do, and so I was just excited to have something that wasn't theirs. And so I have a couple pictures for you. This bottom one here is me, my brother Chad, and then my mom, and my dad is back there too in the very corner. I'm guessing Brent is in the ring. If I were guessing, he's probably in the show ring with a pig. But 4-H has been something that has been a part of our whole world and our whole family, and we really love it. I graduated from HMS High School in 2007. I went to college at the University of Northern Iowa and moved to Omaha shortly after I graduated in 2010. And I kind of bopped around a little bit, ran a bakery, or managed a bakery, worked in a bakery for several years, worked in the church, and eventually decided that I wanted to be a history teacher. So I went back to school. I got a master's in secondary education from Creighton University in Omaha, and spent about 8 years in Omaha before I moved to Colorado Springs to take a high school teaching position there. And I taught high school history in Colorado Springs for 2 years until COVID happened and kind of changed the trajectory of everything. And so after that happened, I decided I wanted to be closer to home, so I moved back to the Midwest. My plan was to just stay in Omaha, but I had a hard time finding a job. I knew I wanted to still be in the world of education, but not in a classroom. And so I started looking at extension as an option, and ended up taking a job with Sioux County Extension in Orange City. And I was there for about 1.5 years. In that time, I also met my farmer, who I'm marrying next month. And so we live by Rossi now. And so the commute from Rossi to Orange City was not particularly fun. So when Clay County had an opening, I was ready to jump on it. And so I've been with Clay County Extension since January of this year. And it has just been really, really great. It feels like home, because it is home. And it has just been really exciting to be here in Clay County. And so this is kind of a merging of all of the things that I love, getting to talk to you guys today about history and about 4-H. And about Northwest Iowa. And so one of my favorite parts of this story, and probably one that I can hardly tell without crying, and making my mom and my aunt cry at the same time, Extension and 4-H has been an incredible legacy in our family. I am the fourth woman and the third generation to work for Iowa State University Extension in 4-H. My grandma Carol, in the far right picture, was a county youth coordinator in Worth and Cerro Gordo County. My mom was the county youth coordinator in O'Brien County for several years, and my Aunt Paula was the county youth coordinator here in Clay County for about a decade. And it is something that is near and dear to my heart. I love being a part of this story and this legacy, and I wouldn't be here if I wouldn't be here standing in front of you and talking to strangers and doing any of this without 4-H and without the example that these women set in my life. And so I am incredibly grateful for that, and I'm just excited to be a part of this story. And so, like I said, this is all really near and dear to my heart, and it is just really fun for me to talk about. And so the combination of being a 4-H'er through and through and a former history teacher, I found a lot of fun information, and I'm gonna do my best to not just lecture at you like a history teacher, but I can't make any promises. And so we will kind of jump in, and as I was looking at the history of 4-H in Clay County and the history of 4-H in Iowa, it's kind of a story that needs to be told in different parts and with a lot of contributing parts. And so how many of you, I'm guessing all of you, are familiar with 4-H and the world of 4-H? Yeah. And so 4-H's motto is to make the best better, and that's something that has really resonated with me from the very beginning. I love this idea of constant improvement and moving forward and doing the next thing and finding new, better ways to do things. That is something that has been true of 4-H through its history, and that was something that I really found to be true as I did this research. And so just to give kind of a background, this was something that was interesting to me, even as someone who grew up in the world of 4-H. There was a lot I didn't know about the organization until I came to work for Extension. But 4-H is America's largest youth development organization. And their focus is really empowering the 6 million youth who are a part of this organization across the country, empowering them with the skills to lead for a lifetime. And that is something that has been true in my life, and I know has been true in the lives of everyone I know who's been in 4-H. And so 4-H programs today really focus on positive and sustained relationships between youth and adults. This is a really big one. We focus on youth-adult partnerships and the ways that we can connect youth with adults in the community who have knowledge and want to share that. I think this is incredibly important. I think it's good for youth to have positive role models in their lives beyond their family members or close acquaintances. I think it's good to build those connections. And so when we have adult volunteers throughout a county that invest in the lives of youth because they care about moving the next generation forward. That's something that I really appreciate about this program. 4-H also focuses on activities that build important life skills. And so when we look at the history of 4-H, this is really where we kind of see its start and its foundation. It starts as a way to promote knowledge and promote life skills. And then it also really focuses on opportunities for youth to use these skills as participants and leaders within their community. I think this is something that I don't ever want to get lost in the world of 4-H. I want kids to understand that they are a part of this story and that they have something to contribute now and not 15 years from now. I want youth to understand that their opinions matter and what they believe in matters. And so that's something that 4-H is really focused on. And in general, the ultimate goal is seeing in these youth an increase in competence, confidence, character, connection, and caring. Just to kind of give you, like I said, a little bit more background, I feel like if you are familiar with 4-H, you know all of the good things, but you don't always know the stats. And so this was something that was really interesting to me. But youth that are involved in 4-H programs are 4 times more likely to contribute to their communities. They're 2 times more likely to participate in science, computer technology, and engineering programs. And they are 2 times more likely to make healthier choices. And so these are all reasons that we can encourage 4-H participation, and we can really continue to fight for this program and continue to support this program. And so now we are jumping into the history of all of this. And like I said, the history of 4-H kind of works concurrently with a lot of different things. And so we are actually starting at the land grant legacy. So how many of you have heard of land grant universities? Some of you, awesome. So in July of 1862, President Lincoln signed the Morrill Act, which established land grant universities. What?
Another reason to love Abe.
Yay, Abe. He's my favorite. And so essentially the idea behind this was that as the United States was growing and expanding, as states were forming, they wanted to ensure that there were colleges and universities for working class and farm families to send their children to. This was something that the government recognized as important. And so essentially the way that this land grant system worked was that these individual states could sell federal land that had been unclaimed up to that point and then use the profits from those sales to establish these universities. And so Lincoln signed this in July of 1862, and just a couple months later, in September of that year, Iowa became the first state to accept the provisions of that act and to begin selling federal land to finance a new college. And so this was something that the governor, Governor Kirkwood, at the time, was really interested in ensuring that Iowa kind of got in on the front end of. And so what else is happening in the world in 1862? Civil War. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but I think it is good to recognize that other things were coming to be as that was happening. And so we see Governor Kirkwood appoint Lieutenant Peter Mellanday to begin scouting out land that had yet to be claimed in Iowa. And he, in his first kind of travels around the state, he pretty quickly recognized that the best land was right here in Northwest Iowa, which if you grew up here, you already knew. And so he scouted out about 204,000 acres of the best unclaimed federal land in Iowa. And that began being sold off in parcels, and those profits were then used to establish Iowa State University. And so one of the things that was really interesting to me was that when I think about land-grant universities, I knew a little bit about them, but I kind of assumed that it just meant that the land that the university sat on had been granted to them to build a college, but it's actually profits from the sale of land to fund the creation of these land-grant universities. And so Iowa State University officially opened in 1869, due entirely to the establishment of the land-grant university Morrill Act. And so just to kind of give you a visual, this was really interesting as well. And this is actually an interactive map that I pulled a screenshot from the extension website. But it's still kind of people are still finding out that they own land-grant land. And so all of the gold dots are confirmed. So those are all areas in Northwest Iowa. Those are all parcels of land that have been confirmed as land-grant parcels. And so you can see that we have several here in Clay County and throughout our region. And so I thought that was something that was really interesting, that we play such an integral part in the story of how Iowa State came to be. And so, like I said, this is going to be hopefully not too tricky to follow, but these stories very much run together. And so while these land-grant universities were being established, and people started attending these colleges, particularly in the fields of agriculture, they started to recognize that around the late 1800s, that adults in farming communities were not always really excited about new ideas or new practices. They were more hesitant to accept those new methods or practices of agriculture, but they found pretty quickly that young people were not. They were not hesitant, they were excited. And so the focus of that research and those ideas and the kind of target audience for that really began to shift. And so we start to see youth programs throughout the Midwest that are beginning to teach new practices and industry advancements. And so again, we see Iowa really leading the way, and like I said, other Midwestern states as well. And so we start to see these boys and girls clubs, agriculture clubs, home economic clubs, corn clubs, tomato clubs, canning clubs, all sorts of different clubs starting to form in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We really start to see people, young people really becoming more interested in agriculture, and we start to see these clubs forming. In 1902, A.B. Graham, who was a school superintendent in Ohio, began formalizing these agriculture clubs for boys and girls. And so that is generally credited as the birthplace of 4-H. And the term 4-H wouldn't actually be used in any federal publication until 1918. And the name 4-H clubs would not become official until 1924. But like I said, this is all kind of happening concurrently in different states. We start to see these clubs forming. We start to see people recognizing the importance of promoting this kind of education. And so from there, we also have to look at where extension started and how extension started. So hopefully you're still tracking with me. We've got the land-grant colleges, we've got 4-H clubs starting to form, and we also have the extension program starting to form. So in 1887, so shortly after the Morrill Act was passed and these land-grant universities started being established, we see Congress pass legislation that provides funds for states to create agricultural research stations. And so they recognized pretty quickly that while these colleges, these land-grant universities, were beneficial and were teaching agricultural skills, that they needed some sort of extension. They needed to extend that learning. And so Congress allocates some funds for these agricultural research stations. And then in 1903, we actually see the first county-wide farm demonstration established in Sioux County, Iowa. And so extension, well, 4-H kind of got its official start in Ohio, and Ohio gets to claim 4-H. We here in Northwest Iowa get to claim extension. And so this countywide farm demonstration was established near what is today Hull, Iowa, and it really just provided a place and a community for farmers to come together and to learn from each other. And so by 1906, the Iowa legislature begins to recognize the importance of this, and they pass the Agricultural Extension Act. So again, this is just the Iowa legislature. This is not nationwide at this point, but Iowa really early on recognized that the extension of this learning, that what was being taught at Iowa State University needed to be spread throughout the state. And so we see these Agricultural Extension Acts being passed, and then in 1913, the Farm Aid Association Act provided for full-time extension agents throughout Iowa. And so this is where we start to see extension develop as we know it today. And shortly after that, the national government kind of caught up and recognized that extension was really important, that these land-grant universities were great, but without a way to reach the rest of the states, there was a kind of a gap. And so in 1914, the Smith-Lever Act created the Cooperative Extension Services in partnership with the USDA. And so this is where we really start to see nationally the creation of extension services. And so you may have noticed in that timeline that we have a lot of overlap. We see land-grant universities established, and then we start to see these 4-H clubs kind of coming into existence under a lot of different names. And at that same time, we start to see extension coming into being as well. And so these are all, like I said, really intertwined, and so they all just kind of make sense together. And so this is just a commemorative plaque in Hull near the site where that first kind of research farm was established. And so like I said, I worked in Sioux County, and so that is something that we are particularly proud of, just the idea that Sioux County was really the basis for the start of extension, not only in Iowa, but really throughout the country. So we'll see if this will play. I have just a quick little video that that campus made that I feel like does a good job just talking about the role that extension plays. Maybe played every time when I was, and if not, it's not major. So this, like I said, this is from campus. This is from Iowa State University Extension and Outreach in Ames. And so if you're ever looking for more information, they are a great resource for that. And so we will kind of keep moving and talking a little bit more about the history of 4-H, and particularly the symbol that has become so recognizable to all of us. It actually started as a 3-leaf clover symbol. It was first used in Iowa So again, Iowa is kind of leading the charge in this sense, which I think is really interesting. And so Oscar Benson was the first to kind of establish a symbol for these clubs and he was in Wright County. And then Jesse Field in Page County kind of worked with him, and they both started using these symbols to represent their clubs around 1807. And so these 3-leaf clovers, 1907, thank you. Yep, that should be 1907. Yeah, I mean, I was still, yeah.
They call them the 3H club then?
So it's, yeah, and so if you look at the clovers, it says heart, head, and hands. Okay. And so they would usually still just refer to them by the club's name, whether they were the agriculture club or the home economics club or just the boys club of whatever county or whatever township. And so we actually see the Clover as we know it come into being a few years later. So in 1911, Oscar Benson referred to the need for 4-H's. And so as he started promoting these clubs, talking about these clubs, he felt like there was another H that needed to be in there. And so, like we said, the 3 H's that were already there stood for head, heart, and hands. So my pop quiz for you for the day is, what did Benson propose the 4th H should stand for? Guesses? Help. That would be the most reasonable guess. But it was actually hustle, which I think is fun. Yeah.
That would change it.
Yeah, that would definitely change it. His thought process was that the idea of head and heart and hands and the way that youth invested in their communities and they, created these projects or learned or grew, he felt like hustle kind of just went along with that idea of not only having the skills, but also having the drive and the motivation to do it. And so that was where hustle came from. But as that was discussed more kind of at the national level, he got outvoted, and so it did eventually come to be that health would be the 4th H. And so that is where we start to see the establishment of the 4-H pledge. I pledge my head to clearer thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, and my health to better living. For my club, my community, my country, and my world. And so this really became 4-H as we knew it. This is where the 4-H's came from, and this was the focus of this organization. They wanted to equip youth with skills, and they wanted to make sure that they were doing it for the right reasons, and they were invested, and they recognized the role that they could play.
So the logo kind of came before the name.
Yeah, so the logo really did come before the name. It was the 3-leaf clover with the H's, and then the name really came out of the development of the symbol. So Ohio can claim the first clubs, but we'll claim the name. Because, like I said, the clovers were first used by Iowa clubs. And so I dove just a little bit into research about 4-H in Clay County. I found as I was researching that there is really a lot out there. And so I started in the exhibit building out at the fairgrounds. There's a whole wall that talks about kind of the first 100 years of 4-H in Clay County and extension in Clay County. And there's a lot of really interesting information there. And there is also a lot, I think we have similar uniforms out at the exhibit building, some ribbons and things like that from 4-H in Clay County throughout the century. But 4-H and these programs really helped establish what would become the Clay County Fair. And so there were regular fairs held in the 1870s and 1880s, but then there seems to kind of be a lapse in either in the record keeping or just in the hosting of fairs. And so we kind of have this gap from about the late 1880s until 1913, when the Spencer merchants organized a Clay County fair and picnic. And so with the development of extension around that same time, we also see the development of a Clay County Fair Association that was established in 1916. And so what started as kind of a hodgepodge of livestock exhibits and agriculture demonstrations in tents and things like that would eventually become the Clay County Fairgrounds as we know them today. And so we start to see some permanent structures in the 1920s. One of the first buildings that we see built is the Boys and Girls Club building, which was constructed in 1929 along with a boys' dorm and some livestock barns and arenas. And so you notice here too, it doesn't actually say 4-H, it still says Boys and Girls Club. And so we kind of see that name slowly evolving and coming to be as the fair establishes itself. So in 1947, we see the construction of a new indoor arena as well as more barns and a new boys' dormitory that was built. In 1971, the girls' 4-H display building was completed. That is what we know today as the exhibit building and auditorium, which was renovated in 2004 based on the information I found. So I think that's about correct. But you'll also notice, and I'll get into this a little more in my next slides, but you will notice that there's quite a bit of division between boys and girls. There was a very clear line between what were boys projects and what were girls projects, and a lot of that came from the fact that those clubs were developed as separate clubs. And so between 1913 and 1916, there were 29 clubs that were formed. Most townships throughout the county had a boys club, which was agriculture focused, and a girls club, which was home economics focused. And so we had those divides. One thing that I found that was interesting was even though we had pretty clear divides, there are records that show in 1925 that over 20% of the members that were enrolled in Clay County livestock projects were girls. And so there definitely was some crossover, which I think is really neat to see that early on, because we would see those divisions exist for a long time. Looking back here, so we said the girls' 4-H display building was completed in 1971. And so in the grand scheme of things, that's not that long ago. And so we see a lot of different clubs established throughout Clay County with focuses either on agriculture or home economics. The Clay County Fair grew pretty quickly and grew in popularity and became a district fair relatively quickly after its establishment in the 19 teens and 1920s. In 1938, Clay County, there are records that Clay County held up to that point the largest county beef show in Iowa. They had about 170 exhibitors showing 274 head of cattle. And then we also notice, as we look at the timing of this, kind of late 1920s into the 1930s, obviously America is in the thick of the Great Depression, and so we really see a kind of a flourishing of these home economics clubs as girls begin looking at ways to preserve food, to save their family money, to create items that they could use in their homes instead of purchasing them. And so we really see 4-H kind of at the forefront of this and really working to support families through the Great Depression. We also see pretty early on in Clay County Fair history, we see the establishment of Achievement Days. And so these Achievement Days were held because the Clay County Fair happens in September and the Iowa State Fair happens in August. And so to ensure that we have representation at the state fair, we hold Achievement Days so that those 4-H'ers can come display their projects or have their projects judged, do do communications and clothing projects, and have the opportunity to be selected to represent Clay County at the Iowa State Fair. And so that still exists today. There has been some contention in my household because I have started referring to them as Achievement Fair. And my fiance is really sure that it should still be Achievement Days because that's what they were. And I mean, that's what I knew them as. I wasn't a Clay County 4-H'er, but I knew that they were Achievement Days.
I was gonna say you have to tell them that your fiance grew up in Clay County.
Right, my fiance was a Clay County 4-H'er, and so he was no stranger to Achievement Days. So I get in trouble when I call it Achievement Fair.
Well, that is just a recent thing.
I did hear that. I think maybe we could turn it back around.
It's only been about maybe 5 years. I
Oh,
think.
well then, we're gonna make it happen. I'm here for it. And so this is when we really start to see the structure of Clay County 4-H and particularly the Clay County Fair as we know it today. And then we also begin to see a shift in focus. This was something that I noticed as I began doing this research, is kind of the way that times change and the way that focus has to change. And so the driving force for 4-H through the 1950s was agriculture. That was the focus of those land-grant universities. That was the focus of extension. And so it made sense that that was the focus of 4-H. So in the 1950s, we saw maybe 10% of the enrollment in Clay County were from non-farm youth. And so this is something that has kind of slowly began to evolve. By the mid-1960s, we start to see declines in enrollment. And so 4-H starts to try to shift their focus a little bit towards personal development. And this is when we also start to see those boys and girls clubs beginning to work together more regularly. They're still, for the most part, their own separate clubs. You have boys clubs and girls clubs for usually each township, but they begin working together a little more, holding activities together, things like that. The mid-1980s, we start to see that divide between boys and girls clubs begin to close as Title IX kind of takes hold, and we begin to move towards more gender-neutral club names. We see township-wide clubs that are for both boys and girls, and so we start to kind of see that focus shift. Looking at 4-H in Clay County today, we have 13 active community and specialty clubs, and so we divide our clubs essentially into community clubs. So those are the clubs that meet in different towns. We have the Peterson Livewires, we have the Sioux Valley Feeders, all of the Lincoln Lions, all of these different clubs that are kind of town-centered, town-focused, or townships are still kind of some of those dividing lines, but we have a lot of clubs available for kids depending on where they live in Clay County. We have more than 200 actively enrolled members this year. We also have a Clover Kids program. This is something that National 4-H created as a way to introduce younger kids to 4-H. And so the Clover Kids programs are available for kids in kindergarten through 3rd grade, and those are facilitated within schools throughout Clay County. And we had about 60 kids participating in Clover Kids this year. In addition to regular clubs and Clover Kids, we also have day camps, which have been the focus of my whole summer up to this point. We have workshops, and then we also promote a lot of state and national opportunities at Iowa State University. 4-H really works to promote things like state conference, and then also national opportunities, National 4-H Congress and Conference, Citizenship Washington Focus, which is a trip to Washington, D.C. And so it's been really neat to see the way that 4-H has evolved through the years, and the way that the focus has shifted as it has needed to. We've recognized that while 4-H is still very much agriculture based, there's a lot more to it. And so our hope is that kids, whether they live on a farm or not, whether they're interested in agriculture or not, have opportunities and recognize all of the ways that 4-H creates skills that will help them throughout their life. And so nationally, 4-H has focused a lot on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. We've really tried to increase our promotion of those projects and activities, and really try to strike that balance between this is an opportunity for everyone, and not just an opportunity for farm kids. And so it is something that I'm really passionate about, something that I really enjoy learning about and talking about. And so I really appreciate you guys coming and listening today. I would love to answer any questions. Perfect. That was the goal.
So I was trying to figure out how did 4-H become part of Extension? I mean, because
that's what I was trying. Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out too. And as far as I can tell, I think the USDA, because Extension was kind of functioning within the realm of the USDA, the impression I get is that they kind of were at the same time as they were establishing Extension, they were also kind of taking over or kind of integrating those 4-H clubs into the USDA as well, because like the symbol, the 4-H clover, things like that are all copyrighted and protected, and there are memorandums of understanding that exist between the USDA and local 4-H clubs and things like that. And so I think the connection was the USDA, as far as I can tell.
And the fact that the clubs were started in order to teach kids about
agriculture and farming, yeah,
and home economics and
so as that government
and
agency,
the time was the same,
right? And so I think the impression I got when I was doing the research was just that it made sense, that it was pretty cohesive to say we have this organization that's an extension of these agriculture colleges, and we have this organization that is teaching kids about agriculture, so why wouldn't we marry those things? So, yeah. Other questions?
Do boys and girls meet together now?
For the most part, there are a few clubs that I saw it more in Sioux County, and I think it just kind of depends. And like the club that I was in was all girls, and my mom led a club that was mostly boys, but is now a kind of joint club. And so it kind of depends, but for the most part, the bigger clubs in Clay County are all boys and girls.
Yeah, there's not very, because the cool kids and the
O&O
kids were both out of Omega Township and O'Brien County. But today, the cool kids, which was the girls club, and they did all home ec type
yeah.
stuff. And now they have disbanded, and now those
kids
the O&O kids is a really large group.
Right.
Yeah, you used to have to belong to both. If you wanted to show
Right.
cattle and sew, you had to be in boys
Then
and
you had
girls
to
clubs.
Hey.
join, you had to belong to both clubs, yep, that's right. I kind of
Yeah.
forgotten that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Because when we lived in Johnson County, I did not belong to the boys club, but the other ones did, because I was never gonna raise
Show
animals
cows.
or work
Marry
on
a
the
farmer.
farm,
Marry
and
a
marry a
farmer.
farmer and
Run a
raise
parrot
pigs,
and hog
yeah.
operation.
She's
And
the only
so-
one who does.
Yeah.
So I sewed and I cooked and so I didn't have to join the boys club and go
Yeah.
to that extra meeting a month, because I just belonged to the girls club.
Yeah.
And then I ended up working in the farrowing house for years.
There you go.
And about that, when, was it in the 70s you said, when the,
Exhibit building?
no,
Or the-
went to the gender neutral?
Yeah.
And we kind of had to go through a transition of some of the club names,
Yep,
so
club-
that they weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that
then,
was-
and
yeah.
then at that time, you could be in a boys' club, but you could enter your girls'
Right.
exhibits through the, because as
Oh,
time becomes
yeah.
valuable, like Paul
Right.
says, it's 2 meetings a month
Right,
otherwise.
yeah.
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 So at that time, you could be, boys and girls could meet together, but it could be ag exhibits
Oh,
and,
and-
right.
But
Got
just
all in the
because
same
you were in the
club.
boys club didn't
Right,
mean you couldn't
right.
exhibit home ec
Yeah.
projects.
But you had to enter it under the girls' name.
But you had,
It was really kind of
Yeah.
confusing.
I couldn't help but wonder, do you have any idea, do they still say the 4-H pledge as part of meetings?
They do. So most, the club meeting that I just went to one the beginning of this month in Everly, and they said it. All of my Sioux County 4-Hers said
Okay.
it, but it is kind of, I'm afraid it's kind
Is
of
it
a
fading?
dying. And so that's something, and I never know if it's just because I'm sappy and I love history and nostalgia and that I love things like that and I want those to continue. Yeah, I think I have seen some clubs kind of go away from that, and you start to see clubs that are really focused on a specific thing. I feel like I don't see that as much here in Clay County as I did in Sioux County. In Sioux County, we had clubs that, like, if you wanted to show cattle, you were in this club. And so you start to see a lot of kind of very specific specialized clubs, and they generally focus less on the traditional 4-H meeting and Parley Pro and how do we lead a meeting and
But there's nothing more delightful if you've ever been to an awards ceremony or anything like that. And here is this whole group of people of all ages, and they stand up to say the 4-H pledge, and it just rises up out of them from, you know,
Yeah, from their
from years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of us who were in 4-H can still
Yeah.
say.
It just comes from
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
And like you say, you hate to see that go.
Right.
Because it truly states the foundations of
exactly.
what we
Yeah.
hope young people
They're
gain through that.
learning, yeah. And so that is something that I definitely fight for when I'm working with clubs, and
Yeah.
make sure we're still appreciating, and I think that is probably the historian in me. But
I have a silly question. Are your camps, I mean, Jenna, how many day camps are you doing this summer?
so many. I have anywhere between 2 and 4 a week between June 1st and July 25th.
And are they only open to 4-H members?
They are not, so that is the beauty of our camps, and that is, we're hoping that they're kind of a funnel or an avenue towards 4-H. Our hope is that we get kids from the community who maybe don't even know about 4-H or don't think they can be in 4-H because they don't live on a farm. And so we get them to come to camps, to come to these day camps, and then it's usually a few 4-Hers, and what I've seen this year at least is a few 4-Hers and a lot of kids who aren't in 4-H, and so it's been fun to hear the 4-Hers talk to these kids and tell them about their 4-H club and what they do and why they love it. And so it has been fun to see, and that is the hope that we can. We have really seen numbers decrease. COVID was really hard on 4-H statewide and probably nationally. I think that is true, but we have seen numbers go way down in exhibit buildings and shows and kind of every every aspect. And so my hope is that we can continue to get people excited about it, because I think there's a lot of value there, and I think it's worth fighting for. So, well, thank you guys so much. This was really fun. I'm glad I got to spend lunch with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have goodies if anyone needs a 4-H pen or a sticker that says "Ask me what I learned today."
Because we want to wear those around town.
Right. Yeah. So I felt like those were necessary. We have some really good pens that we just got. They're my favorite.
A couple of things before y'all go. We do have some events coming up for the Clay County Heritage. On Sunday, July 10th, we will have a Parker Museum open house from 1 to 4. And we will be serving root beer floats in the backyard. A&W in town has donated root beer for us. And then the next Lunch and Learn will be July 27th. So it's the last Wednesday of the month, and it will be about Iowa statehood and how that kind of affected the development of the state. So you guys can come to that one as well. And before you leave, there are note cards at your table. So at the end of all of the Lunch and Learns this year, on one side, if you could put something you liked about today and or you didn't like, and any future topics you would be interested in. And then on the other side, if you can write, finish the statement, "My community shares blank." It can be a word, a phrase, several words. At the end of the year, I'm going to compile all of these into a little picture so we can see what everybody says.